became MP, I was working as a sociologist. And due to my profession, we not only, during our observation, fill out some forms, but we are also speaking with the person who wants to do that, and to are open for our interviews, I should say. So there's a remarkable point who was addressed by the incumbent, and this is the war and the end of the war. So in my view, and in our views, we debated it this morning and the day before, this is quite a crucial point for a high representative and a high turnout in this election, and people who support the president and the ruling party. But this nevertheless means that there are not expectations concerning the social and the economic future of your country.
Thank you very much. The lady in pink.
Hello, Gülnar Nazim Kızı. I'm a chief editor. I've got two questions. First question. Prior to the elections, in Azerbaijan, a number of independent journalists were detained, and they claim this was because of their professional activity, and they were detained before the elections for their professional activity. So, do you have any recommendations vis-a-vis this issue to the government? Second question. Some of your observers traveled to Karabakh, if I am not wrong. Have your observers shared the demolitions and barbarism they have seen on the liberated areas? And will you reflect the images they have seen, the situation they have seen on ground in the liberated areas in your report or in your statement? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Just to take the second part, or your second question, if I may. Yes, over the course of our observation mission here, we did deploy long-term observers into the regained territories. And to be clear exactly on the work that they were doing there, they were there to observe preparations for election day. And what that meant was going to observe that precinct election commissions had been established. It meant going to meet the members of those precinct election commissions, checking things like in relation to the voter register and if it was publicly available, and all of the other preparations that go into election day. That was the purpose of the visit of our long-term observers to those territories, because as we do note in our report, 26 precinct election commissions were established in those territories for the purpose of this election. And that was the work that they were there to do. Thank you.
And I want to continue the same question. Yes, I personally was in these areas. And again, the purpose we here as observers for the elections. So we paid our attention to the electoral polling stations, for the people, how they were trained, how they know what to do, how the polling stations are organized. But at the same time, yes, for me was, I saw everything. And believe me, while traveling now in Ukraine, we saw the same. We saw the same. We see how everything is destroyed. And at the same time, I can tell you that on the way, I saw huge construction, which is now on the way. So that's what I can tell you about this.
Let me add the answer to your question concerning the journalist. As I already mentioned, I have worked as journalist myself, and it's quite important that we underline this topic. But to do so, we had a podium with different journalists who were talking very openly about this situation. And once again, all the observers were very aware of these facts and the circumstances under which your work takes place. And this is one of the critical points we will mention in the report, because I think it's quite election, not only the campaign, but also the situation. 6.7% as far as I know, with a huge support for the incumbent, which is about 93%. That, in my view, as Vice President of the OECPA, means that the incumbent, the President, has to and can clearly afford to enable a much more free press, because he has so much support shown yesterday.
And also I want to add that we are aware about recently adopted law on media. We discussed it with the representatives of the media circles here, and our findings about that, our analysis about that, you will find in the final report, which will be distributed for you shortly. Thank you.
We have time for 2, maximum 3 more questions from the hall. The lady over there, and then the gentleman here, and then the lady there in the glasses, and then I think we'll need to move on.
Thank you. I represent
Real TV.
Be short. Your report contains an allegation of election irregularities involving one person who voted in several polls. I wonder, did your observers see it themselves, or you saw it on the social media? Because there is no investigation and it is not verified. So how can you involve it in your report if it is not verified? It can be old from previous elections, and we had this example before. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question. What I can tell you is that we report on election day on what our short-term observers observe directly themselves, and the methodology is very clear on this. We had more than 330 short-term observers in polling stations across election day, and they did note a number of issues which are contained in our report, which you'll get very shortly, but I might just tell you about just a few of them, if I may, and which you'll get a chance to see the figures when you look at the report. We did see, and what we consider a serious violation, we saw evidence of ballot box stuffing, and we saw that on a high number of occasions reported by observers. We also saw what looked like seemingly identical signatures on voter lists. We saw that in about 5% of observed polling stations that we were in. We saw instances of things like group voting, boxes not being sealed properly like they should be, and reports of the number of ballots in the ballot box being higher than the number of people who voted. We saw that in 12% of instances. We also had a difficulty in a small number of constituency executives where earlier on about election day and about the irregularities that were observed and the concerns that we had. In the report, we point to these very specific instances that we observed ourselves. And you'll also see other information there in terms of what was observed in relation to the opening of voting stations, the counting, voting, tabulation, and those issues as well. But there's just a couple of examples that we have ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman at the front.
Parviz Ashimli, Voice of the Day. Voice of the Day. Did this election win the trust of the international community?
Thank you very much for your question. And if I could just be very clear about what we do when we come here and why we do it in the way that we do. Azerbaijan is a member of the OSCE, and they have commitments as a member of the OSCE. And then to inform the public of what we saw, the public here in Azerbaijan. And they can then use the information that we have provided to make their own judgment. And then following on from that, we then in our next report, we'll make recommendations. And those recommendations are there to help improve the processes that we saw needed improving. So the report that we produce for the people of Azerbaijan in terms of the reforms that they may make in the future based on the commitments that the authorities here have already entered into. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A lady over here.
Shabnam, the question is, some people argue that our Zihir mission is looking only for negative aspects in the election process in Azerbaijan and left out of the missions the positive aspects. How could you comment on this?
Immediately I can answer, that's not true. That's not true. Because again, you know, when I was opening the trainings for the short-term observers, both MPs and short-term observers of ODIHR, what I told, very simple principle. What you see, exactly this you write in the form. Exactly this you report to your team. That's why everything what we saw good things, we write. We saw bad things, we write in the forms. And for example, me personally, yesterday we visited one of the polling stations where IDPs from Kelbajar were voting. And I can tell that according to my opinion, according to what I saw, it was brilliantly organized. Huge amount of people, they are openly voting. Everything organized very well. That's positive thing, and I reported it. But unfortunately, on the other polling stations was another situation, and we saw, let's say, other things which were reported. So it's not the truth that only we are trying to fight bad things. We are writing exactly the things we see.
If I could, if I could add to that, I mean, earlier in my comments, I talked about some of the training of polling station members that I observed personally when I was over in Nakhchivan. And I talked about how that was interactive and comprehensive, and it was. And I was there for quite a while to look at how the people in the polling stations were being trained to work on election day. So we do note positives like that. We also note positives like the Get Out the Vote campaign that the Central Election Commission conducted. Yet nevertheless, when we go into a polling station on election day and we see that perhaps that training hasn't been effective in preventing from certain procedural irregularities, we have to point that out as well. That's what exactly Arthur was talking about when he was speaking to the short-term observers before election day.
Let me also mention, please, an answer to your question, that every observer has to follow a code of conduct. And one of the most important topics in this code of conduct is that every observer has to be impartial. And this is quite important to see and to watch the whole process. But the report that we wrote is based on evidence, on the reports of the teams that we have seen, mostly in the case we had the opportunity as observers, as already was a museum. This makes us more aware as colleagues, as MPs, what the situation in Azerbaijan means. And especially the women we were talking to were personally impressing me because they shouldered.
And I particular report, regretfully, we wrote about that Azerbaijan didn't have possibility to organize elections on the occupied territories. And I'm really happy that the bad thing happened, and now you can organize elections in all internationally recognized territory of Azerbaijan. It's written in
Firstly, was this a special observation mission for you this year when some of your members could not enter the country and PACE was not invited? And secondly, your results and statements differ from other delegations and individual observers who have been praising the elections without criticism. How do you explain this, and whom should we believe?
Well, thank you very much for the question, and I'll take the second one, if I may. The OSCE's ODIHR has observed more than 400 elections since its establishment. We have very clear commitments for different countries as members of the OSCE. We also have a very clear methodology about how we do our work, and it is this afternoon to explain in quite some detail just how methodically we go about our work in terms of when we deploy, what we're here to do, who we meet with. We don't speak for other observer organizations. We can only speak for ourselves, and again reiterate the fact that we were invited here to do this work based on a very clear set of principles and a methodology that we have, that we use in every country that we deploy to when we deploy election observation missions. Thank you.
Let me again to repeat about peace. Yes, the OSCE our leadership decided to deploy the mission, and we here, more than 300 observers, were observing these elections.
Thank you very much indeed. That's all we have time for today. The report and press release in both language versions are available in paper and also on the ODIHR website. Thank you very much indeed for your interest.
And due to my profession, we not only during our observation fill out some forms, but we are also speaking with the person who wants to do that, and to are open for our interviews, I should say. So there's a remarkable point who was addressed by the incumbent, and this is the war and the end of the war. So in my view, and in our views, we debated it this morning and the day before,